Every once in a while, on a slow news day, a story comes across the TV about a family of ducklings that fell down a storm grate. I remember a story that went like this. The mother duck then grabbed a passing policeman by the pant leg. The policeman shoved what he thought was just a goofy duck away, but she persisted, grabbing his leg again and again, every time he tried to leave. Then, waddling to the nearby storm grate, she sat down and waited for him to come and investigate. The policeman came to where she sat and saw little baby ducklings in the water below. Well, the heavy grate was removed with the help of a tow truck, and they were able to lift. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 baby ducklings to safety. Mother and offspring then departed to a nearby pond. That mother duck didn't have to learn how to do what she did. Her God-given maternal instinct took over. It was her nature, her duck nature. In our gospel lesson this morning, the Canaanite woman did the same thing as the mother duck. She persisted in seeking help until she got it. It was the same God-given maternal instinct. Not duck nature, but human nature. And that is just what Jesus wants us to do. Be persistent in getting the help you need. We should not be intimidated by authority figures. And remember, we have a friend who can help us even when human endeavors fail. Christ is waiting to help us today. Our passage begins like this. Leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. Tyre and Sidon were Gentile towns about 50 miles away. Well, why do you suppose Jesus traveled 50 miles into Gentile territory? Did he have some urgent business there? Was he just out for a Sunday afternoon drive? Well, I doubt it. There's no explanation provided as to why Jesus went to Tyre and Sidon, but he did. Now let's continue our story. A Canaanite woman from the vicinity came to him crying out, "Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is demon-possessed and suffering terribly." Do you think that Jesus came 50 miles from home just to minister to this distraught mother? Who knows? After all, this is Jesus. Nobody cared more about people than Jesus. It makes no difference their religion or where they live. And this was not just any woman. This was a Canaanite woman. In Jesus' day, no observant Jew would speak with a woman outside his own family, and particularly not to a Canaanite. They were traditionally considered enemies of the Jewish people. And as we read, it's true that at first, Jesus seems to spurn her cries for help. Matthew tells us that after she made this desperate request of him, Jesus did not answer a word. That couldn't have been very encouraging to this woman. His disciples were no help. They came to him and urged him, "Send her away, for she keeps crying out after us." At this, Jesus answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel." I'm surprised this woman wasn't totally demoralized by Jesus' response. However, she didn't give up. She came and knelt before him. "Lord, help me," she said, and he replied with another crushing remark. "It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." So now it's time for Jesus to be surprised. "Yes, it is, Lord," the Canaanite woman said. "Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." You know, scholars puzzle over Christ's conversation with this woman. It seems so un-Christ-like. Let's take a second look at duck nature and compare it to human nature. I don't squeak. Duck nature, or animal nature in general, is instinctive. That is to say, an animal has no choice in the matter. It reminds me of the story about the scorpion and the frog. You know that one? A scorpion asks a frog to carry him over the river. The frog is afraid of being stung, but the scorpion argues that if it did so, both would sink and the scorpion would drown. The frog then agrees, but midway across the river, the scorpion does indeed sting the frog. They were both doomed to death. On the way down, when asked why, the scorpion points out that this is his nature. The duck and the scorpion had no choice but to follow their nature. Now, the very human mother in our gospel story, like all of us, had the freedom to choose how to proceed. So, I wonder if Jesus was giving this woman a test of her desire to have her daughter healed, but even more important, a test of her faith that he could really heal her daughter. Her reaction to his un-Christ-like response revealed her true nature. Now, I suggest that because of the way Jesus ends this unusual story. He commends this woman for her great faith. There are only 3 people in the Bible who were specifically commended by Jesus for their great faith. A Roman officer who pleaded with Jesus to heal his servant. A woman who had been hemorrhaging blood for 12 years and touched the border of Jesus' robe in hopes of receiving healing. And this Canaanite woman who came to Jesus begging him to heal her demon-possessed daughter. You know the funny thing? None of these 3 people had the right, according to Jewish law, to approach Jesus with a request for help. They were prohibited from approaching him by very strict cultural and religious norms. We already mentioned the Canaanite woman's lowly status, but the woman hemorrhaging blood was ritually unclean due to her bleeding and shouldn't have touched the border of Jesus' robe at all. And of course, the Roman officer was a representative of a Gentile government that opposed the Jewish people. By law, none of these people had the right to bring their desperation to Jesus. But Jesus didn't reject them or correct them. In fact, he commended each one of them for their great faith. The way Jesus defines great faith is, frankly, different than I would expect. I would expect people of great faith to demonstrate it with courage or self-discipline or sacrifice, not to be desperate people pushing their way into Jesus' presence. Desperation is a scary state of being. Desperation can drive us to make unthinkably bad choices. Many of us know what it's like to feel desperate. Just like the Roman officer and the bleeding woman and the mother of the demon-possessed child, the agony threatens to overwhelm us. We feel like we can't breathe. There's a popular phrase, desperate times call for desperate measures. I want to suggest to you that a more helpful phrase would be, desperate times call for Jesus. Now that's the real truth of the matter. This Bible passage about the Canaanite woman shows us that desperation doesn't disqualify you from having great faith. Neither does your gender or your social status. All that's required is the willingness to bring your desperate need to Jesus. And notice that the Canaanite woman brought her desperation to Jesus even when he initially responded with silence and then seemed to turn her away. Some people read this passage and think that Jesus was being insensitive to the mother's pain. But remember, it may be that Jesus did come on foot to this faraway Gentile town 50 miles from home just to meet this one desperate woman in her need. Now, even more impressive, he came from the right hand of God to this lonely planet to help us all in our times of desperation. Desperate times call for Jesus. Jesus may have walked 100 miles round trip to minister to this Canaanite woman, and Jesus walked in our shoes all the way to the cross for no other reason than that he loves us. He shared our weakness, our questions, our pain. Remember, the night before his arrest, Jesus prayed so desperately that he sweat blood. Jesus understands what it is to be desperate. He didn't come to wave a magic wand and take away all our troubles. But he did come to show us that we are not alone. His message and his ministry kept coming back to this one truth. There is a God, and God loves you. What was the Canaanite mother's first response to Jesus? Have mercy on me. She knew that mercy is an essential part of God's character. And so even though she knew she had no right to approach Jesus, she was counting on his mercy to meet her daughter's needs. And notice that even when Jesus was silent, even when he tried to turn her away, she knelt down at his feet. The Greek word here indicates that she knelt down in worship before him. No matter whether he answered her cry for help or not, she would still worship him because he is Lord and because she could count on his mercy. Dr. Keith Brantley served as a medical missionary in Liberia, West Africa. In 2014, an epidemic of the Ebola virus swept through Liberia. Over the course of 21 months, more than 11,000 people died from the virus. No one was safe. Healthy people died within days of being infected. So imagine Dr. Brantley's fear when he began manifesting symptoms of the disease. He put himself on immediate quarantine. His colleagues couldn't come near him. His family was back in the U.S. He had to deal with his illness and his fears all alone. So he picked up his Bible and he took his desperation to the Lord. Dr. Brantley found comfort in a passage from Hebrews 4:16. Let us then approach the throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. This verse became his focus for prayer over the next few days as his pain and nausea increased. When tests confirmed that Dr. Brantley had contracted Ebola, he called his wife, Amber, to give her the news. Amber Brantley reports that her fear and sadness were so great that she had trouble finding the words to pray. So instead, she simply sang hymns of trust, praising God in spite of their situation. The Brantleys took their need to Jesus in different ways, each one trusting in God's mercy and love, no matter what his answer was to be to their prayers. Dr. Brantley's colleagues arranged to have him flown to Atlanta for an experimental treatment for Ebola. Within a few days, his condition began to improve, and God mercifully answered the Brantley's prayers when a short time later, Dr. Brantley walked out of that Atlanta hospital as a survivor of the Ebola virus. Of course, not everyone who trusts in Jesus and suffers a serious disease walks out of the hospital cured. And if they do not walk out of the hospital cured, that does not mean that their prayers were in vain. If they do not walk out of the hospital cured, they walk into the arms of Jesus with a new, perfect body made whole at last. Jesus complimented this Canaanite woman for her great faith. Great faith is pretty simple, at least by Jesus' standards. Bring your desperation to him and trust in God's love for you. The God who gave the mother duck the instinct to save her ducklings is the same God that gave up his power and majesty and ultimately his life to give us power over death. He loves you too much to ever turn you away. Desperate times don't always call for desperate measures, but desperate times do always call for Jesus. Amen.